I will tell you some of this man's credentials here because he is being audacious. He is being bold in trying to come for the throne of Carl Douglas as our nation, as our show's legal person. Nobody. I mean, you better not miss because that nobody comes for his throne. We don't have a legal expert. We've never had a challenger to Carl Douglas's legal throne around here, but he's the nation's justice correspondent. Billy is telling you need to read his book. He's the author of Allow Me to Retort. It comes out next month, and Billy is giving it your highest endorsements, yes?
I love it. I just started it. I can't put it down.
Frequent guest, MSNBC, SiriusXM, maiden voyage on the show, and I am eager, thank you for joining us, I'm eager to get your expertise on the racial cataclysms that we have in Miami Dolphins coaching, where you've got a black guy who was too black and is now suing the league because he was too black, and a white guy who says he's a human being who has a black father but has never experienced racism. We've got a cauldron down here, and I need some sophisticated analysis. So thank you for joining us, and tell me everything that you find interesting here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm not coming for Carl. There's space for both of us. I just want to be your Supreme Court guy to come on and dunk on Jason Whitlock whenever I have the opportunity. That's my whole thing that I'm going for. Look, in terms, look, I present as an African American male, right? And I can trace part of my lineage back to Mississippi with a guy from a plantation that was freed when Sherman was coming through the South, opened up a can of whoop ass on those people. Like I have, that's an eighth of my background, right? But another eighth of my background is my grandfather is from China, was from China, came to Mississippi, married a black woman, had a half Chinese, half black daughter. That's my mother, right? So I have an eighth that's Chinese. If Joe Biden nominated me for the Supreme Court and said, here's my first Asian American nominee for the Supreme Court, that would be fraudulent. Not me, I'm not the fraud, but Joe Biden would be the fraud. And that's the problem with the Dolphins in the NFL here, right? It's not, Mike McDaniel, he's being put in a difficult position. I understand that, right? But the fraud is not him. He's just out there trying to live his best life, right? The fraud is the Dolphins trying to use this person who admittedly does not have the lived experience of a minority, of an African American, as one of their, look at how diverse. No, he ain't diverse. Because here's the thing that I promise you, there has been 0 times where Mike McDaniel has been stopped by a cop, right? And the cops are like, well, you gotta let you off with a warning, but you need to fix that taillight. And he said, well, actually, officer, I have a black father. Because the officer did like, Negro, step out of the car then. What are we even doing here, right? So that's never happened to him. You are what the cop thinks you are when you roll past him. And the cop does not think McDaniel is black, so he has not had the experience of a black man. That's not on him, but it's something on the Dolphins.
So, Elie, at the risk of playing devil's advocate, like Socrates, the first man to ever be canceled. You can see I'm reading your book. So, cancel culture starts with Socrates in Elie's brilliant book. By the way, allow me to retort. You missed the subtitle, which is A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But I do want to ask you this. To be fair, genealogically speaking, Mike McDaniel is as black as he is white, like Barack Obama was as white as he is black. It's complicated coming from, being mixed race and, of course, having, either being light-skinned or, dark-skinned. And, that's pretty complicated, right? So, I have some empathy for Mike McDaniel here and having to be confronted with issues of race, no?
Oh, absolutely. Again, his answers are uncomfortable because he's in an uncomfortable position. Like the NFL and the Dolphins have put him in an uncomfortable position, right? He didn't, I don't think the man asked for this, right? So I do have some empathy for him. But we also have to understand that race is just a social construct, right? And people use that to say that, the race doesn't matter. No, it matters, but it matters because of the social constrictions that it puts upon you. Right. So I just did my history. I just did my family history. Right. That I'm an eighth Chinese and, but let's look at my kids. I got 2 black kids, 2 black sons. Right. And they're an eighth Chinese. They're an eighth freed American slave. My father's Haitian, so they're 2/8 Haitian, right? My wife though is from Zimbabwe, right? And her dad just goes all the way back to like, so they're 2/8 Zimbabwean, right? But on her mother's side, her mom is half Indian and half Scottish. So my kids are also 1/8 Indian and 1/8 Scottish. But when the cops seize them, they're just black kids.
Unless they're wearing kilts.
Right? Like literally, my wife's family has a tartan or some ridiculousness, right? That goes all the way back there. But like in the moment, the social restrictions that are placed on them because they will con in this society as black, right? If they go to England, they'll because of the color of their skin, they'll look Pakistani, and they'll get Pakistani slurs. Race is a construct, but those constructs do limit people, or those are the constructs that people have to break out of. And McDaniel just hasn't had that experience of having to be limited by those constructs, or thus to have to break out of those constructs. And that's not his fault. Look, I wouldn't wish it on a person. Like it's not fun. So it's not his fault. It's not like he's passing or anything like that. But again, when he's then held out or held up as a diversity hire, that's where the problems come in, right? It's trying to tokenize him when his experiences have not been like his skin folk, if you will.
Yeah, that was my question, actually, is the beef with the NFL and the Dolphins for classifying him as a minority hire. And to be fair, as a Jew, I'm a minority hire here at this show, although I'm not paid, which actually makes me a student athlete. Actually, unless I can secure that NIL deal once and for all with LifeWallet. But so, Elie, let me ask you this: what is the likelihood of success of Coach Flores's lawsuit? Number one, and number two, what is the likelihood he will ever return to a job, head coaching or otherwise, in the NFL?
Yeah, likelihood of success of the lawsuit, low. Likelihood of him returning to a job, like nil, right? Sorry, I don't want to be all British here. Like zero is his likelihood of returning to the job. Look, I love the lawsuit. I think we need more of this. I'm a big fan of advocacy through legal action. It ain't gonna work. The problem that the lawsuit has is that it's very hard for Flores to show intent to discriminate, right? You can show all the numbers and you can look at all the stats, if you will, right? But it's very hard for him to show that there's intent to. And we've been through this before. It's hard to show when you're talking about, like, he claims that he was offered $100,000 to tank, right? Which, by the way, what a bad deal, right? I would do it for I could lose football games for like $50,000. I don't see what the big issue is. Right? But they offered him, right? It's hard to, even if he had taken the money, it would be hard to prove that he intended to lose the football games, right? He could just be bad, right? Like, it's hard to prove that the NFL intended to be racist. They could just be bad at hiring diverse coaches, right? And if you can't show the intent, then the rest of the lawsuit starts to break ahead. And I didn't see, he might have it somewhere that we don't know yet, because part of the thing that is likely to happen is discovery. One of the reasons why I think the NFL will settle in some way is that I don't think they want them to have discovery. And for those who don't know, discovery is the process where I sue you, and because we're in active litigation, I get the court to order documents given to me about your dirt. I don't think the NFL wants to see that, because that might have the smoking gun emails, right? But so before they get to discovery, I do think the NFL will settle in some way, and Flores will call it a victory in some way. But them actually paying full freight for their dirt, I don't see that happening.
Walk me through, if you would, though, if you're saying seems like an explosive lawsuit, a noisy lawsuit, but not necessarily a smart or winning lawsuit. If what the goal is not to coach again, but to be a historic symbol, you can't settle. And now you're in you can, but if your goal is to win, not claim victory because you took $11 million instead of the money you would have earned coaching, you destroyed your career for a principle. What's that cost?
Curt Flood lost, right? Like, people forget Curt Flood the hero of free agency and getting baseball players off the plantation system, Curt Flood lost hard and didn't play again. But the way in which he lost allowed for people to see the dirt, to see what's happening, allowed people to organize, allow people to get activated. And Flores could have that kind of effect. He's going to lose. But the manner, there's that line from, I think it's like Henry III. What does it matter when how a man falls down? Well, when the fall is all that's left, it matters a great deal. The way Flores loses could have a big effect on whether or not we can start some advocacy and action around his cause, or whether it's just another thing that the NFL dodged out of. But that again, the likelihood is that it's going to be another thing that the NFL dodged out of, because we can't get collective. It's very hard to get collective action against the NFL. There's been a lot of talk about the halftime show, right? And look, I love the halftime show. I love Black halftime, fun stuff for me. I'm a 40-year-old man, right? That works for me, right? But bottom line, those were a lot of Black people singing and dancing for a league that has shown no commitment to diversity and no commitment to transparency in its offerings, right? So they at the end of the day, it's the Jay-Z thing. At the end of the day, this is the behemoth that we've decided to work with. And I see this in my own life. Like for the first 2 years after Kaepernick, I was like, I'm boycotting. I watched Tom Brady win I watched the games again, right? Like COVID changed that a little bit, but you watch the games, you watch the draft. I care that the Giants stink always. This is trying to excise this thing out of people's culture, out of people's lives, out of people's Sundays and Saturdays and Mondays and Thursdays. That's actually super hard. And as long as that continues to be super hard, getting real collective social action against these group of 32 billionaires is going to be difficult.
Elie, since 1991, the NFL, the Super Bowl halftime show has featured popular music acts. For nearly that entire time, hip-hop has been the predominant culture in America, whether it's music, movies, TV, fashion, you name it. My friend Steve Stout wrote a whole book about it, The Tanning of America, where he posited that the influence of hip-hop culture tanned the mental complexion of a generation of Americans and led to the election of Barack Obama. Despite that, we've only seen through the years some rappers here and there kind of included in larger ensembles of pop and rock performers, but never a fully hip-hop themed, which again, I would argue is the dominant American culture, halftime show performance until this year. What took so long?
Yeah, well, part of what happened is that there's a lack of cultural competency that we accept from white people that we do not accept from anybody else. I was born in 1978 on Long Island, New York, right? I can sing word for word like 10 or 15 Billy Joel songs, all right? So I'm on my Downeaster, Alexa. I got all of that in my back.
Are you auditioning for Mike Ryan's musical right now?
I want to hear all of that. I want to hear all of that. Please don't stop.
It's commercial music. Be careful.
Okay, I have to be careful.
There ain't no island left for islanders like me. Yeah. Look, I can do the whole thing, right? Because I have to. I had to be able to know that stuff and learn that stuff in order to be culturally competent in my community. But white people, some of them, think that they can just bounce around through this pluralistic society, only knowing about white things and never understanding or appreciating things from other cultures, right? It is unconscionable to me that you're a 40-year-old dude who, by the way, that's the target demographic of the NFL halftime show, that you're a 40-year-old fat man with broken knees and you can't name one Dre song that you can't sing along to. I mean, not sing along all the words, because I know how some white people like to say all the words, and some words are exciting. You can't say no, that you can't bop along to, right? You can, if they had rolled out Metallica, which is a cultural contemporary of Dre, right? If they had rolled out Metallica, every Black person, they might not have known Metallica, but they would have started playing, and just about every Black person would have been like, oh, yeah, it's the Mariano Rivera song. Yeah, I know that. Because we have to know that. We're not allowed to not know that, right? You think Mariano Rivera from Panama picked Metallica as his entrance music? No, that's not how it happened. But to be culturally competent, Mariano Rivera now knows Enter Sandman, as does every person who watches baseball, right? So like, how is it possible that you're a white person in this world and you're just, who is this Mary Bilge? And where are her pants? Like, how are you that person? You're only a white person is allowed to be that person.
I want to go back for a second on Brian Flores because I'm wondering what winning looks like even if he loses, because I am curious about this discovery and what it'll cost to buy Brian Flores not embarrassing them the way he wants to embarrass them, while also not, I'm assuming that he's going to make the NFL at the very least pick up the cost for all his attorney's fees, because he can't win a fight against the NFL, but he does have leverage because he's made the loud noise, and they don't want this going to Discovery. So walk me through some of that.
Well, first, we've got the Donald Sterling example, right? Donald Sterling, Los Angeles Clippers owner, had some N-word tapes or something. I actually forget the details of Sterling because it was like pre-Trump, and like I have this like time dilation issue where like the racism that we used to care about pre-Trump seems so like really that kind of person in trouble.
Okay, so like quaint racism,
novel,
like,
novel racism.
It's some benign racism,
right?
Yes.
Is it cute? But are you calling Donald Sterling's racism cute comparative to today's pulled back overt racism?
It is though, right?
We have Nazis in Orlando.
Like, oh, let me blow this dog whistle. I'm going to be so nice.
It's a foghorn.
There's Nazis in Orlando, for fuck's sake. Okay, it's novel.
It's not a dog whistle. It is now a foghorn.
Right. So whoever Donald Sterling N-worded, he had to sell his team, right? And so one version of victory is Stephen Ross, Trump supporter, donor, whatever, him having to sell the team for the dirt he's done and diminishing the opportunities of this particular black coach and whatever. That's one version of victory. Owners, there is one of the things that I have learned in my long years is that there is always another white billionaire willing to pick up the slack, right? So like changing out one white billionaire for another one doesn't actually mean progress. It means kind of changing the deck chairs about the Titanic. My version of victory would actually involve Goodell, right? Goodell is their shield at this point, right? He stands up in front and takes all the slings and arrows for these 32 billionaires. So he gets the hate, he gets the booze, and he has no power over that league. He is a puppet master. And so something involving kind of accountability to Goodell or reformation of the commissioner's office to actually kind of have more control and more power over the 32 owners, that would be a lasting victory that really could bring about change. Now, again, I don't think it's going to happen, but there's something about at various points in American history, there have been black people who have looked at worse odds than what we're looking at today, right? You can think about Frederick Douglass kind of sitting in a slave plantation in Maryland being like, I don't see how things are ever going to get better. And he would have been right, but he kept fighting, right? And you can kind of go through black history and find people who face insurmountable odds and kept fighting. And so I'm happy that Brian Flores is keeping the fight, even if he isn't gonna win this one. Maybe he won't, but maybe the next person will, or the next person. You got to keep trying, and I'm happy that he's trying.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. This seems like a lawsuit in search of evidence. And while I think it's incredibly brave and likely sacrificial of Flores to do this, and I'm rooting for Flores, but then I've been rooting for the Dolphins for 40 years and look where it's gotten me, But I also think that collusion is difficult to prove. Look at, see Colin Kaepernick, but you don't need collusion. You don't need 32 billionaires in a smoky, dark room. They all know which side their bread's buttered on. They just know that, if they all act in their own best interest, which is never hire Colin Kaepernick, never hire Brian Flores again. I think best case scenario, there is an implicit bias that happens in the NFL as evidenced by the percentage of black players in the league versus the percentage of black head coaches or front office personnel, period. I want to take this opportunity to segue, though, speaking of 32 white billionaires dealing with a league that is upwards of 60-70% black, to your book. ever since I studied constitutional law and Supreme Court issues at the University of Miami undergraduate with an eye on law school, which I never made. Thankfully, yes, I know you're a recovering attorney yourself, Elie. You can appreciate that.
To be fair, I should just point out that Khan in Jacksonville is not white.
Oh no, yes, it's majority. It's a majority of a majority of white billionaires. That's true. And white men, majority of white men. And which is true of what I'm about to say, which is that I've had the very unpopular opinion amongst my friends and peers, Elie, that the United States Constitution was a negotiation with terrorists. Okay, that you had a majority of white, rich, middle-aged to old men, many of whom were slave owners, whose entire negotiating position was based on the preservation of that way of life, of their ability to own other people economically, sexually, as farm equipment, whatever they decided that they wanted to use those people for. And then the other white millionaires or other white rich dudes who were basically agreed to compromise with them, placing a series of, I would argue, bombs, mines, traps, booby traps within the document that helped preserve effectively white supremacy within that document. Was not actually a document that sought equal rights and justice for all, particularly not for women or people of color. And incredibly, this is what Elie's book is all about. So it speaks like directly to me, and his thesis is remarkable. It's written in layman's terms, so you don't have to be a lawyer to appreciate it. There's references to all kinds of pop culture shit in there as well. I saw a reference to Captain America and Hydra on one particular page. But talk to me about this thesis of your book as the Constitution as an actual, I guess, good in theory, but in execution has been extraordinarily discriminatory.
Yeah, first of all, Billy, if you have friends that don't understand that, we got to get you some better friends, because that's just the
I live in Miami,
foundational premise of the country, right? That the Constitution was written by slavers, colonists, and people willing to make deals with slavers and colonists. It's not a particularly good document. It hasn't been a particularly successful document if you count the fact that we had to have a live ammo civil war not 100 years after it was ratified. That's not a good track record for written constitutions.
And all those amendments. what did you call it? A day one patch?
Day one, yeah, the Bill of Rights, that's a day one patch to the Constitution. That's how undercooked it was by the time it came out. Look, if you look on the world stage, look at what South Africa did. South Africa coming out of apartheid. Did they tack on some amendments, some ornaments onto their apartheid constitution? Be like, okay, we're good now. Everybody's happy. No, they started over with a whole new constitutional convention that included all the black and brown people who were left out of the original constitution. They took 2 years to do it. They came up with a whole new document that is basically the envy of the world. I mean, we don't understand that because we're Americans, that other countries have good things too. But the South African Constitution is pretty widely regarded as one of the best pro-democracy written constitutions in the world right now, because they started from scratch in 1991. We tacked on some ornaments, right? You basically took a Chevy and put a Cadillac hoodie ornament on it and said no, it's a Cadillac. No, it ain't. All right. You can tell the difference. So my book really kind of goes through why looking at our Constitution only through the lens of the slavers and colonists that wrote it is kind of the completely wrong way to go. And I try to arm people with arguments, because here's the other thing, right? Everybody's had that conversation with your friends, Billy. Everybody's had that conversation where, well, it says that I have the right to bear arms. And so what? And people need to know how to combat that argument. And so my book is a lot of, again, kind of everyday examples of how you combat these arguments in your life.
Allow me to retort a black guy's guide to the Constitution. Appreciate your expertise you delivered, sir. It was nice talking to you. We will have you on again. And you're right. There is room in the world for two black legal experts on a show, even though Brian Flores doesn't have any black legal experts working on his staff for him with that lawsuit. And you can be the first and only in the history of our show to tell us about his entire lineage while an afro pick is in his afro. It's the first time that's ever happened. I salute you. You did not have to tell me that you were multiracial or how the cop would identify you. You have an afro pick in your afro.
I was just
I
getting
go hard in
started.
the paint.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Elie.
Billy, the world was introduced this week to Miami shenanigans in the New York Times, where the details are rich and glorious and have a lot of history in them. But just go ahead and start to inform the audience that might not be following this what the New York Times wrote about a restaurant dispute that escalated between, our rival families.
Patty Mazzei, very gifted former Miami Herald political reporter, then very gifted political reporter, and now the New York Times, Florida. She's the head of the bureau, the head of the Florida bureau, and she has to write about stories that obviously are going to interest people internationally. She writes for the paper of record, the New York Times, and so but as a local person, local journalist, loves this kind of telenovela juicy shit. And
Miami and Florida have more of it, like weirdly, strangely, consistently. We produce more weirdness than anywhere in the United States, right?
All that happened is a guy walked up to another guy sitting outside Morton's Steakhouse in Coral Gables, one of the richest and most exclusive cities or municipalities in Miami-Dade County, and kind of like gave him a bop upside the head, kind of like a hey asshole kind of a thing. That's it. Words were then exchanged. The guy who did the bopping on the head was then roughed up and arrested. All that is a pretty boring happy hour, probably at Morton's, but for the fact who these people were. The man doing the bopping, the bopper, if you will, was C.J. Jimenez. Carlos Jimenez is, junior, really. Carlos Jimenez is the former mayor of the county of Miami-Dade and a current United States representative from this area. And this was his son, who was a very powerful lobbyist, local lobbyist, also used to work for his mother's cousin's construction company, MCM, responsible for building the FIU bridge that collapsed and killed 6 people several years ago. And CJ's very influential in local politics, both on the campaign side and on the government lobbying side. And who he bopped was Alex Diaz de la Portilla, a former state senator, now city of Miami commissioner, and who he was confronted by and roughed up by was the city commissioner's so-called sergeant-at-arms, his own personal bodyguard and Tonton Makut, financed by the taxpayers. This was a Detective Stanley Paul Noel, who you may recall several weeks ago on this very program, we talked about a car accident involving Alex Diaz de la Portilla, a young female aide, driven by this very same Detective Stanley Paul Noel. And this is an accident for which we have not yet seen the video footage of. We have not yet seen the police report for. But there's that. But there's also who he was sitting at lunch with. First, it was Carlos Lago, the brother of the mayor of Coral Gables, Vince Lago, who is a lobbyist with dozens of issues before the city commission that Alex Diaz de la Portilla will have to vote on. Also, one of those clients at his law firm is Jorge Mas and Mel Reese, the multi-billion-dollar, 131-acre development for the soccer stadium. Also sitting at the table was Humberto Hernandez, who is a former city of Miami commissioner who was arrested and went to prison for mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and ballot fraud. In the 1997 election, he had drawers full of absentee ballots. Okay, this guy was arrested on federal charges. The governor at the time of Florida, Lawton Chiles, removed him from office. Then the guy runs again, wins with 65% of the vote. This guy under indictment for mortgage fraud and wire fraud and bank fraud wins. After he wins, he gets arrested again for election fraud and gets removed from office again by the governor of Florida, Lawton Chiles.
So this is a great lunch.
It's the whole thing's unfucking believable.
It's also just Miami. Like there was another lunch happening like that at the Mortons out here on South Beach.
Always. And these are, you have to understand, these are all Miami political dynasties. Jimenez, Suarez, Diaz-Balart, Diaz de la Portilla, like all of these families who just for generations, the siblings, the sons and daughters and spouses, they all just enter the public realm and feed at the public trough. Because once you get a taste of that public money, it's more addictive than crack, because there's so much money in this town that the government controls and gets to trickle up instead of trickling down. And that's what all this is. This is bullshit power plays. It gets better. CJ Jimenez, the bopper, his wife, who is an attorney, who both of them had helped Alex Diaz-La Portilla in his past campaigns and now are apparently mortal enemies. That's the thing, too. This goes back, and it's like WWE. It's like heel turn, face turn,
well,
heel
this
turn.
is why the New York Times is calling. They want to understand this web of insanity.
There's no way to understand this. She was arrested with Alex Diaz-La Portilla. CJ Jimenez's wife was arrested with him in 2012 in a Boston hotel room that they were sharing for some reason, and they refused to stop smoking in this non-smoking room. And the Boston police had to basically trespass them and arrest them because they refused to leave. They were like drunk and belligerent to the Boston police. And so, and arguing, of course, that we're lawyers from Miami. And what else? It's like, what else? Humberto Hernandez is alleged to be Alex Diaz-La Portilla's bagman, which is what he was doing probably at lunch with him and a lobbyist who has dozens of issues that this guy is going to have to vote on. Also, there's this issue of the sergeant-at-arms position. This whole operation is totally crooked. We've talked about it in the past, how the mayor, Francis Suarez, abuses it to the tune of $1 million a year with his own private security force, unprecedented in the history of Miami, with no known threats against any of these people. And yet here they have these guys out. They were not in the city of Miami. They were in the city of Coral Gables. And what happened after CJ was taken into custody for a misdemeanor nonsense is that there was a jurisdictional dispute. The city of Miami wanted to extradite him in handcuffs to the city of Miami. And here the police chief, Ed Hudak, in Coral Gables is like, well, no, this occurred in Coral Gables. We're going to keep him in Coral Gables and book him in Coral Gables. And there was a fight about whether or not, what did the city of Miami want him for? Probably, well, they could have planted drugs on him. They could have kept him in the system for a little bit longer. They could have trumped up a felony charge, for example. And all of this was caught on video by various surveillance cameras in Coral Gables. And it is an absolute clusterfuck. And it's a shame. Coral Gables is a pretty rotten city in and of itself. I like the police chief. He's one of the good guys, I think. But they're now getting dragged into the banana republic that is the city of Miami and the current local political scene, which is, it's impossible for me to fully describe. Incidentally, Humberto Hernandez, when he went to trial on these various charges back in the mid to late 90s, his attorney had an affair with his wife, starting on the first day of jury selection all the way through his guilty verdict. He later tried to appeal on the grounds that, well, what could be more an effective assistance of counsel? My lawyer wanted to run away with my wife, and I got convicted. He did not win on those grounds, but that's just another because Miami moment.
That sounds like a disbarment to me.
Dude,
that seems like an unfathomable breach.
And what I should mention is that car accident, that mysterious car accident that we talked about several weeks ago, where Alex Diaz-La Portilla tried to cover it up. His sergeant at arms, they were coming from Humberto Hernandez's mother's funeral. So that's what when they got into that mystery car accident that we still haven't been able to get to the bottom of all these weeks later.
Billy, just what's happening? Like, what is happening in our city?
Escándalo. It's a telenovela.
No, but sergeant at arms and police behaving badly, and these political factions of commissioners who are corrupt and have felonies and keep winning despite indictments, and have taxpayer dollars security forcing them when they don't need a security force. Like, what is this? And physically battering, assaulting, and arresting and detaining people in cities that they have no jurisdiction over as well. And then other jurisdictions having to kind of not sweep it under the rug, but help them kind of cover up the impropriety of this. And here's the most disturbing thing about all of this, and what this drama really overshadows, is that none of these people are working for their constituents. None of these people are doing anything for the people of Coral Gables, for the people of Miami, for the people of Miami-Dade County. They're all just caught up in their own bullshit and their own telenovela nonsense and their own arroz con mango nonsense, and nobody's doing anything about the city of Miami. We just get
for the people of the city of Miami, one of the poorest cities in the United States of America. And this is the real tragedy. You have a city whose budget is $1.3 billion a year. And all of this is going astray, is what it's going. It's being misappropriated. It's being stolen, in some cases outright, and nothing is being done where people are in one of the poorest cities and their rents are going up upwards of 40%. So we have to deal with all of this bullshit. And what are we going to do for a billionaire? What do the billionaires need today? They need a zoning change. They need to build a higher condo with luxury units starting at $3 million. They need a public park to build a soccer stadium at. Whatever the billionaires need, we're all here working for them. Okay, the head count of the city of Miami is all dedicated to serving billionaires and millionaires and not serving the people who actually pay their salary, who actually put them into office, who are responsible for them having a job at all. And what do you have? You have a bunch of Ponzi schemers, con men, and imaginary coin salesmen. That's what you get.
He's fired up. Billy Corben, you said billionaires in a way during the COVID era that made spittle travel toward me with such disgust that it hit me right in the face. But your passion can do that too sometimes. I wanted to ask you about the Miami Herald's cover story on extremist groups.
Yeah, They have this fun new Sunday edition where they do see these beautiful covers and then they go inside and they cover an issue quite extensively. In this case, it's called The Oath Keepers Among Us. Leaked emails, exclusive interviews, and a major federal indictment shed new light on a Florida network of militia members. You'll recall we talked about the Orlando Nazis just a couple weeks ago. And what this covers is that, first and foremost, Florida is number one in the country out of 48 states, I should say, for arrests at the January 6th Capitol riot insurrection. We have, I think, over 80 and counting come from Florida. Of the 48 states that have arrests, Florida is number one with a bullet, no pun intended. It also talks about how Florida is not only the breeding ground for these types of extremists, groups like the Proud Boys, groups like the Oath Keepers, but it is the home of a great many people who are responsible for fostering and feeding and festering this type of extremism, like Mike Flynn, Roger Stone, Enrique Tarrio from Miami, who is the former head of the Proud Boys. And so not only do we attract these people to Florida, but we train them. And it really asks the question of why, what we always ask, why Florida? Why Miami? And the best answer, of course, is because Florida and because Miami. And the truth of the matter is that this is a place where we have a very permissive population, we have a transient population, and we have a place now as we sit here that is not only the home of the former president, the former guy, but is also home to a governor that does not see it in his best interests to demean or belittle these extremists. He likes to say, well, it's obvious everybody hates Nazis. It's like, right, but you can't say that for some reason. You know, what used to be a political gimme is now somewhat taboo because, God forbid, you should offend your base.
Lose the Nazi vote?
Right. Nobody cared about the Nazi vote before. But in Florida, it turns out the extremist vote is very important. And again, when I say the Miami of today is the America of tomorrow, Miami was ground zero for right-wing extremism through the 60s, all the way through the 80s and 90s. We were the domestic terror capital of the United States. We had bombings, we had assassinations, we had jet airliners, commercial jets being blown up out of the sky. We had people try to launch shoulder harnessed missiles against Polish freighters in the port of Miami, and just this kind of intrigue, if you will, which is kind of, as Elie said, kind of novel in hindsight.
Intrigue?
Yeah.
You're calling that intrigue.
I
think you just had a surface-to-air missile. Somebody just standing, weren't they standing on a median trying to take down a plane?
On the MacArthur Causeway, actually, trying to take out a Polish freighter at the port of Miami. There was a Venezuelan airliner that was blown up, taking the lives of everyone, all the passengers and crew aboard it. I say intrigue because that was all a lot of anti-Castro political kind of intrigue that that is embedded in our history here in Miami. Of course, as we mentioned earlier, Alex Diaz-Laportilla, his father was a Bay of Pigs veteran and also a accused drug smuggler as well, because Miami. But all of that intrigue has from Miami's past has turned into a classic. Miami of today is the America of tomorrow. And really, Miami, Florida, and then America. Because a lot of the people, as it turns out, we exported hate, extremism, and violence and insurrection from Florida to Washington, D.C.
What a punctuation. We exported hate, extremism. What else was it?
Oranges and machine guns. That's what Florida, those are our main exports.
Billy, thank you. We will talk to you again next week.
Cocaine's.